Okay, now we got the last item of the day, but it's a long one. This is item 22. Consideration of the Porter State Company, Bradley Ranch LLC, Trio Petroleum. Public hearing to consider an appeal by Trio from the January 31st, 20 decision of the Monterey County Planning Commission to deny the application of Trio for a use permit to allow temporary production testing for 4 test well sites in James Valley, the adoption of a mitigation negative declaration, approval of a use permit to allow the construction of 4 test wells for temporary exploration for and the removal of oil and gas in James Valley. And today we have Bob Schubert of RMA Planning to lead the presentation. And I wanted to encourage people, we have, because we have so many speakers today, we're going to limit public comments to 2 instead of 3 minutes. I have all these speaker cards so far. If there's other speakers, you have an option to we'll go with these speaker slips first. And then after all the speaker slips, then anyone else could also join, go up to the mic and speak as well. So, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, I'm Bob Schubert, the project planner. With me today is Wendy Strimley from County Council and Megan Jones from Wincon Consultants to prepare the initial study and mitigated negative declaration for this project. The project site is located in James Valley between Interlake Drive and Highway 101 west of Bradley. The proposed project involves construction of 4 temporary production testing wells at the location shown here. The yellow dots on this map show the existing oil wells in the vicinity of the project, including those at the San Argo oil field, which is approximately 5 miles to the north. The red dots are the applicant's 4 proposed well sites. The project includes site preparation, drilling, and temporary production testing as an exploratory effort to determine whether oil is available in commercial quantities. Potential future production wells will be subject to additional environmental review and permitting. The depth of each test well would be between 4,000 to 6,500 feet. No hydraulic fracturing or enhanced oil recovery is proposed. Each well site would have a 105-foot tall drilling rig with above-ground improvements that are typical of oil well facilities. Well site number 1 is on a 406-acre parcel, 1 acre of which would be disturbed. It's zone F40 and consists of ag land, which is routinely disc and left fallow. It's adjacent to active row-crop agriculture. These are photo simulations of the well facility. The simulation on the left shows the drilling rig, which would be in place for approximately 19 days while the well is being drilled. The simulation on the right shows what the facility will look like during testing operations after the rig is removed. Well site number 2 is on a 344-acre parcel, 2.2 acres of which would be disturbed. 1/2 acre of the disturbed area would be for a gravel access road. It's zone F40 and is located on open grassland that was historically used for grazing cattle. These are the photo simulations of well number 2. Again, the temporary drilling rig is on the left and the testing operation facilities are on the right. Well number 3 is on a 573-acre parcel, 1.1 acre of which would be disturbed. It's zone permanent grazing and is located on open grassland that was historically used for grazing cattle. And these are photo simulations of well number 3. Well number 4 is on a 158-acre parcel, 5.8 acres of which would be disturbed. It's zone F40 and consists of ag land, which is routinely disc and left fallow. It's adjacent to active row crop agriculture. And these are the simulations of well number 4. Measure Z, which was passed in November 2016, prohibits the drilling of new oil and gas wells in unincorporated areas. It is not currently in effect due to litigation, and it does not apply to this application. This processing of this application is governed by Title 21, which is the inland zone ordinance. The use permit will only allow temporary production. The proposed conditions prohibit any form of well stimulation treatment, including hydraulic fracturing, acid fracturing, and acid matrix stimulation. The recommended conditions indicate that the use permit will expire 18 months from the date that construction is started on the fourth and final well. Each of the 3 other wells may not be tested more than 18 months from the date that construction is started on the well. If the applicant finds commercial quantities of oil, the applicant would be required to apply for a subsequent use permit to develop the site for full oil production, which would require further environmental review. Should the applicant not obtain a subsequent use permit for full production, all wells must be abandoned, all temporary facilities must be removed, and the sites must be restored to their pre-development state as permanent grazing, non-native grassland. A performance bond or a security in the amount of 100% of the estimated cost of well abandonment and site restoration must be submitted to the county prior to the commencement of use. A mitigated negative declaration was prepared for the project, which analyzed the impact categories which are shown on this slide. Evaluation of these impacts resulted in the determination that, with the exception of air quality and biological resources, the project as proposed would not result in significant impacts to any of the analyzed environmental factors. And there are a total of 14 mitigation measures that are proposed for air quality and biological resources that are included in the proposed conditions of approval. The mitigated negative declaration was circulated from August 8 to September 8 last year. Comments received from the Monterey Bay Air Resources District asked for application of the district's best management practices to reduce air quality and request consultation with them regarding reportable engines. Application of the district's BMPs and consultation and registration regarding portable engines has been added as a condition of approval. On December 13th last year, the Planning Commission passed a motion of intent to direct staff to return on January 31st with a resolution to deny the project. On January 31st, the Commission found the project categorically exempt from CEQA and adopted the resolution denying the project. The Planning Commission found that the project would be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of residents of Monterey County, that clean air and water are important to the county's agricultural economy, that the majority of residents agree with Measure Z's findings, and that there are no counterbalancing benefits of the project to support its approval. The appeal is based on 4 contentions. I'll briefly summarize each contention as well as staff's responses, which are contained in detail in the staff report and the resolution. The first contention is that the finding that the project would be detrimental to the health and safety of people working in the vicinity is not supported by any evidence. Since the hearing before you is de novo, the board should evaluate whether the evidence supports the finding of detriment. The initial study concludes that the project does not have a significant environmental impact. If the board finds on the basis of substantial evidence that the project has no significant environmental impact, the board may adopt the mitigated negative declaration. However, if the board finds there is a fair argument that a project may have a significant environmental impact, even if the county is also presented with substantial evidence that the project did not have a significant impact, then an EIR is required. If based on the record, the board has further questions about the impacts of the project, the board could request further information. This could result in revision of the initial study or the preparation of an EIR. The appellate's second contention is that the Planning Commission's denial of the permit is an unconstitutional taking of private property without compensation. If the board approves the permit, Trio has no takings claim, since it would authorize the temporary exploration of oil and gas at the 4 well sites. If the board were to deny the use permit, Trio has not substantiated its argument that a denial of the use permit would result in a takings. Trio must demonstrate factually that the denial deprives it of a property right and that the denial has interfered with investment-backed expectations. Trio's appeal does not prove it has a property right because it has presented no factual evidence of the nature of its lease or property right. Trio also has not submitted any factual evidence of reasonable investment expectations. The appellant's third contention is that the findings are based on irrelevant evidence which cannot form a part of the substantial evidence to support the decision. Trio appears to be arguing that the consideration of environmental factors is preempted by state law. This argument is directly in conflict with CEQA, which requires the county to conduct environmental review of the discretionary permits. Trio quotes from a 1976 California Attorney General opinion regarding state preemption of local regulation of underground phases of oil and gas activities, but that same Attorney General opinion goes on to conclude that the state has not occupied the field to the exclusion of local governments. The Attorney General observed that for certain activities and concerns, which include land use, environmental protection, aesthetics, public safety, and fire and noise prevention, local government retains local regulatory authority so long as the local regulations do not conflict with the purposes of statewide regulation. In a workshop before the Board of Supervisors about state regulation of hydraulic fracturing, the Department of Conservation acknowledged that the county retains traditional land use authority, including the right to conduct environmental review under CEQA. The appellant's fourth contention is that the initial study and negative declaration focus on impacts from the test wells without also addressing potential future impacts from a speculative commercial oil field was proper. Although this issue was not addressed in the Planning Commission resolution, some of the speakers at the Commission hearings contended that the mitigated negative declaration was inadequate because it was limited to an analysis of impacts of the 4 wells and that it should have included an analysis of the impacts from a production well field. The mitigated negative declaration did analyze the reasonably foreseeable impacts of long-term production in which all 4 wells would be used for production. Any long-term production would require subsequent CEQA review and permitting by federal, state, and local agencies, including a use permit from the county. There are 4 options for the board to consider. The first one is to grant the appeal, adopt a mitigated negative declaration, and approve the project. The second is to direct staff to prepare an EIR. If the board finds that there is fair argument based on substantial evidence that the project may have a significant effect on the environment, the board could direct staff to prepare an EIR. The board could remand the project to the Planning Commission for a decision based on the additional information contained in the EIR, or could retain jurisdiction and hear the application after completion of the EIR. The third option would be to direct staff to consider further investigation of potential environmental impacts. If the board has questions raised by the initial study and comments, but is not ready to conclude there is a fair argument of an environmental impact, the board could request additional information and investigation of potential impacts, which could result in revision of the initial study or preparation of an EIR, depending on the results of that investigation. Again, the board could remand the project back to the Planning Commission or retain jurisdiction and hear the application after further study. The fourth option is to continue the hearing and pass a motion of intent. If the board desires to take a different action, the board could adopt a motion of intent and continue the hearing to a date certain for our staff to prepare a resolution with modified findings per the board's direction. It's staff's recommendation that the board grant the appeal, adopt the mitigated negative declaration, approve a use permit to allow temporary production testing for the 4 wells, and adopt the mitigated monitoring and reporting program. That concludes the staff report. Are there any questions for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Schuler. We will open it up for questions first from my colleagues on the dais, and then before we open it up for public comments. Anyone? See none? We will then open it to public comments. Well, I jumped the gun here to go to public comments. This is an appeal, and we usually allow the appellant 10 minutes to make their presentation, so we're going to go back to that now. And then we usually allow a couple of minutes for rebuttal at the end after all public comments. So, is anybody to make a presentation on behalf of the appellant Trio?
all have a copy of this in front of you. I'm going to fly through this pretty fast. My name is Steve Raleigh, I'm with Trio Petroleum. This process began back in 2016 when we decided to proceed with the application for a CUP. Since that time, we went through about over on our 7th planner right now, and since 2016, we've gone through the whole process as Bob described, and that's what brings us here today. There we go. I want to say that this is not a legal presentation, it's more technical. Like I said, we're going to move through it pretty fast. We'll have our legal team come up. This is just for location purposes. As you can see, this is an extremely the south portion of the valley of the county. This is the project area. This is a little bit closer view. The project area is here in the circle. You can see the proximity of the different things around. All these dots in here, these are all wells in the county. There's about 2,700 wells there. 2,300 of them are in this area right here. This is the Salinas oil field. This is a little bit closer. The 4 dots in here are 4 well sites. This is the Salinas oil field. This is Highway 101 running north and south. You can see that the area is surrounded by hills and Camp Roberts on the southeast. This is our project area in relief. These 4 discrete projects come from a geophysical data set that we had in this area. And the reason we have 4 exploration wells is because we found 4 discrete anticlines in this area. When we went to the planning department back in 2016, we asked them whether or not we should do a permit for one or one at a time. They concluded with our agreement that it would be best to do a permit including all 4 of the sites, because we would do an initial study on all 4 sites, and because they're in such close proximity, we could do the initial study would also cover the impact of the area in general. And so that's what we did. This is just a scale view of it. You can see that the area is very undeveloped, farmland. We've got some hills on the west. We found it. The river on the east, and Camp Roberts to the south. Very, very little housing in the area. It's all agricultural or grazing. This is a new type of project for Monterey County. It's mid to high gravity oil. Most of the oil that is found in this valley is heavy gravity using steam. This is much more conventional. The total footprint of the 4 wells is about just a little under 6 acres. So it's not going to be much of an impact that way as far as the footprint. This is not a thermal enhanced project, not steam. Steam is not required on this. This will be very conventional. Bob went over some of the agencies that reviewed this project. This is just more of it. I'll skip through those. This was the distribution list. These are all the issues that were discussed in the initial study, and he went over that pretty well. In the mitigated negative deck, it was proposed this project would not have a significant effect on the environment, and it was found these 4 attributes of the project would not have potential to significantly degrade the quality environment, would have no significant impact, long-term environmental goals. Said project would have no significant cumulative effect on the environment, and this project would not cause substantial adverse effect on human beings, either directly or indirectly. I want to accent the point that this project involves no hydraulic fracturing or fracking, no acid matrix stimulation. We've not requested that. We specifically excluded that in our permit application, and we want to stress that point. Any recovered or produced water that will be brought up with the oil, if there is any, will be delivered to a licensed wastewater facility. Instructed that facility, it'll be trapped and disposed of with the proper authorities in that facility. I've got a lot of other things here, but at this time I'd like to turn it over to our legal counsel and let him see what he has to offer. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I want to stress that this is an exploration project. There's been a lot of talk of the impacts for a development project were not considered. This is not development. This is to see if there's a reason to be there commercially. So these are exploration wells. If we have encouragement commercially to go after a large project, we have to come back, and we're glad to come back to the county and go through a complete development project application. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Before I have minutes.
My name is David Balch. Good afternoon, Chair Alejo, members of the Board of Supervisors. I want to just quickly address some of the legal issues that are raised with respect to this application. First of all, we are very pleased at all the hard work staff put in, working with Rincon on the negative declaration on the staff report. We obviously support their recommendations today. We support the conditions of approval. There are 39 or 40 conditions of approval. We fully support those. A couple of issues that were raised. First, you heard from CBD's attorney about piecemealing, and I wanted to address that. Piecemealing means if you are only addressing in your environmental documents a portion of the project. In California, an EIR is not required where it cannot provide meaningful information about a speculative future project. In that case, deferral of an environmental assessment does not violate CEQA. That's the Rio Vista case. There's a lot of case law that says when you're doing the type of initial studies that we are doing here, and you don't know what's going to result. We don't know what the flow rates will be. We don't know what the volume will be. We don't know if the exploratory wells will hit anything, and if they do, will they be producing after 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Until you know that, you cannot do an EIR on a full-blown production field because you simply do not know what that production field looks like. And so it is standard in California, you do 2 levels of environmental analysis in situations like this. You do the initial study on the exploratory portion, and if it looks promising and you think you're going to convert it to a longer term, you then go and do the full-blown EIR. And that's what would happen here. One of the conditions specifically says if you want to go into production, you will need to do a new use permit application and new environmental review. So that will take place here. On the findings, there was you need to have proper findings before you can, I'm going to pull this up, before you can vote. There needs to be findings that bridge the gap between the data and your conclusions. And I believe the findings here today strongly support any decision that this board would reach. It is critical, though, to remember the public agency has to have sufficiently reliable data to support its findings. It needs substantial evidence, has to be relevant evidence in the record. Irrelevant evidence, on the other hand, cannot be used to support a determination of substantial evidence. Well, why do I get into this arcanery? The staff has put together what I believe is an extensive list of evidence. And CBD put together a 17-page counter letter that they say constitutes contra evidence. However, that letter does not address this project at all. That letter addresses projects in Colorado and in Pennsylvania on the East Coast. Then it does projects down south in California. The CBD objection letter has no bearing whatsoever on the current project. For example, they talk about the dangers of fracking. We're not fracking in this instance. They talk about the dangers of enhanced oil recovery. And then they go on to say, well, of course we understand they're not doing enhanced oil recovery. So it's important here that we remember that the only true evidence that we have before you is the evidence that's been provided by staff, provided by Rincon, and fully supports the granting of our appeal. 2 quick legal issues, and my time is almost up. One is on takings. I don't think we need to address that today simply because the recommendation is to approve the project. If that were to get reversed, we would certainly enhance the record to have more takings analysis. Finally, on Measure Z, I want to quote from Judge Wills, where he talks about Measure Z's purported prohibition on land uses, and everybody says, well, the county retains land use jurisdiction. He found it to be clearly a pretextual attempt to do indirectly what the county cannot do directly. And the county council at the hearing and interveners council everybody understood you can't regulate downhole activities. Again, we don't have that concern today because the findings today do not impair downhole or address downhole activities like we had in front of the Planning Commission. But if there was a recommendation for a reversal of staff's findings and recommendation, we do then need to get into, okay, what could be permissible findings? Because frankly, what we saw before from the Planning Commission, we don't think was properly raised. We'll keep the rest of our time for rebuttal. If the board has any questions, I'm more than willing to address whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll go back to public comments. We'll give you 2 minutes at the end for rebuttal, and then we'll open up for additional questions and comments from the board supervisor.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Holland Krutzman. I'm an attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity. We've submitted written comments that should be before you. For my 2 minutes here, I think I'll focus on a couple things. This board should reflect the will of the public, and a lot of times that can be hard to decipher. But this isn't one of those cases. The will of the public was expressed clearly in 2016 when Measure Z passed by an overwhelming number of votes. And in Measure Z, it prohibits the exact type of dangerous project that's being proposed here. And it would be patently unfair to approve this project while oil companies are holding up Measure Z's implementation in the courts. I'd also like to focus on the legally deficient initial study. As the planner mentioned, it only analyzes for the first 4 wells of this project. But Trio is telling us, and it told the Planning Commission, that it hopes to drill multiple wells on each of these 4 sites, 3 to 6 wells on each site, and it hopes to develop as much of the Haines Valley oil deposits as it can. It claims there may be hundreds of millions of barrels there. And the initial study did not analyze the impacts of any of this. And under CEQA, any reasonably foreseeable impact must be fully analyzed before the project goes forward. And this type of piecemealing isn't allowed under the law. So the Trio is asking to open up an entirely new area of Monterey County. We can't move forward with these wells knowing that they intend to fully develop the field, and I'd like to ask the board to affirm the Planning Commission's wise decision in denying this permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Fishman. I am a resident of PG and president of Communities for Sustainable Monterey County. I was totally astounded not to see the words climate change mentioned in the staff recommendation. It's a known fact that we are in the process of cooking the planet, and this is the ultimate environmental impact. How come this fact doesn't enter into consideration, given that the issue at hand is a request for expanded oil production and that climate change is directly related to the effects of oil production? We need to change course now and big time. Let's remember also that our local economy is based on an agriculture that needs a stable climate. Often we hear supporters of expanded oil production express 2 understandable concerns: jobs and energy independence. As for jobs, anyone who reads business publications knows that more jobs are being created in the renewables sector than the fossil fuels. And as for real energy independence and national security, renewables are the answer. The Army, by the way, has concluded that much. So in conclusion, in the light of all this, the Commissioner's decision to reject Trio's application to drill 4 more exploratory wells was the right thing to do, and I urge you to do likewise. And I'm asking you, think of your legacy. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, board. My name is Dr. Laura Solorio. I'm president of Protect Monterey County. We're really disappointed that the staff did not offer alternatives to the Board of Supervisors to support the Planning Commission's, your selected representatives, to deny Trio's application for exploratory wells. One thing is I would say that if these are exploratory wells, there should be no financial gain from these wells if they are only exploratory. This type of shale does eventually require acidization and some fracking. Deep aquifers, there was some mention of protecting the Salinas River, but deeper aquifers, as we all know, are the water of the future. I also would ask you, if they decide to expand to more wells, are you going to then have an environmental impact report and deny those wells? I think the best thing is to stick to the Planning Commission's decision now. I think with the current national government's irresponsible reaction to climate change, and many people, which I can't really understand that, Monterey County needs to mitigate those activities which will affect the air, water, and soil for future generations. I would also think that anybody who receives contributions to their campaigns from the oil industry or to any other very personal projects, I would think that that would be undue influence in voting on this measure. We're starting to ask that more and more of state and federal legislators, and I would certainly ask that of the Board of Representatives who more directly represent me. So thank you for your time.
My name is Robert Frischner, and I'm a voter in Monterey County. The reason an oil company wants to spend money on exploratory wells is because they believe there's a huge potential for future profits. Trio stated in a Planning Commission meeting that they hope to drill 3 to 6 production wells for each of the 4 well pads. They claim they could produce hundreds of millions of barrels of oils in this valley. Extracting that much oil would be a disaster, drastically increasing the harm to our water, air, and climate. Environment is the issue. Our findings are solid. By our, I mean both the Planning Commission's and the Measure Z's findings. They claim our environmental findings are unrealistic and irrelevant. Of course the plaintiffs are going to say that. Furthermore, the voters agree with us. Whom do you trust? The citizens and the Planning Commission or the applicant? This is a bad deal. The county has much to lose environmentally, but little to gain. The last thing the county needs is an expanding oil industry. And I urge you to vote to deny.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. I'm Beverly Bean, Salinas. The initial study and mitigated negative declaration prepared for Trio's application is inadequate because it only accounts for the first 4 test wells and omits any analysis of the future production wells that Trio expects to drill. As the previous speaker said, Trio itself has stated estimates the Haines Valley leasehold to contain hundreds of millions of barrels of recoverable oil and significant recoverable gas. These impacts are not mentioned in the negative declaration. This application minimizes the impact of Trio's intent to develop extensive new oil and gas in Haines Valley. The impact of the entire fossil fuel extraction plan is ignored. The negative declaration also omits the impact of transporting, refining, and burning this oil and gas. The California Environmental Quality Act requires agencies to disclose and evaluate all reasonable foreseeable impacts of the project. This study and declaration do not meet the requirements of CEQA. And furthermore, since you stayed implementation of Measure Z after the voters approved it, to be fair, you should now stay this new well permit until the Measure Z litigation is resolved. Please vote to uphold the Planning Commission's denial of this appeal. Remember, this is the company that is currently suing the county. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Barbara Evans. I'm a member of Protect Monterey County. I live in Carmel and on Providence Pacific Road. I speak in support of the Planning Commission's denial of Trio's application to drill new wells. It is clearly the intention of the industry to explore and expand the commercial viability of oil production in Monterey County, in total disregard of the will of the people. The tactic is to stall implementation of our initiative in litigation and delay until the appeal is finally decided. Well, it is only fair that it should cut both ways. If we cannot implement, then the industry cannot seek new development. We have to abide by the stay, but they do not. That's simply not right and not fair. Arguments use technicalities of law giving them the right to sneak in new development, exploration. It is offensive. We, the people, clearly voted for no development of new wells. Today's agenda is to consider approval of a use permit. Staff recommends, and all documents are prepared in support of, approval of conditions, with conditions and mitigation measures. I wonder what happened behind the scenes that directed staff to prepare all that documentation to approve the project. Is it a foregone conclusion? It appears that the board has to measure the degree of impact on the environment, either no significant impact or may have significant environmental impact. Are you willing to make that determination, lacking an EIR and more information, gaps in data, knowing the industry uses lots of nasty chemicals that are proprietary secrets, and that operations would unquestionably have unintended consequences? Is the staff report further lacking as it does not include the Planning Commission's input and does not give the option to deny the project? I ask, why even get started with a project that, if found to be completely commercially viable, will bring on another challenge by the people against further development? We want to move to renewable energy, not to mention that the appeal has not been resolved.
Thank you very much.
The stay should cut both ways. We
Yes.
can't implement, they can't develop. I urge the board to deny Trio's application and appeal in its entirety at this time. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Karen Locke, co-chair of Montauk Pacific Grove and Pacific Grove resident. I'm asking you to please delay any action on Measure Z in litigation. The courts delayed the implementation of Measure Z in December 2016. In December 2017, the court ruled that fracking in the initiative has to be stopped until Measure Z is litigated, is complete. Do not approve any more drilling. The issues involved in these new wells pollute our water, air, and the environment. The health and welfare of Monterey County residents are to be considered. 73,877 people voted for Measure Z. Until Measure Z litigation is complete, we will not approve any more drilling. Stand with the voters, the Planning Commission, and protect Monterey County. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and supervisors. My name is Michael Saint, and I'm representing the Citizens Climate Lobby chapter of Santa Cruz County. Basically, our efforts at Citizen Climate Lobby is to try to promote federal legislation for a carbon fee and dividend that would actually put a fee for every ton of CO2 produced by the fossil fuel industry. My basic reason for coming up here from Santa Cruz is I came here to applaud Monterey County Planning Commission on their strong leadership in saying no to Trio Petroleum's 4 exploratory wells project. After decades of deception and corruption by the fossil fuel industry, the adverse effects of the fossil fuel industry on our citizens are becoming common knowledge. The citizens, obviously, as has been said before, have said no more fossil fuels through the support of Measure Z. The Monterey County Planning Commission has said no to Trio Petroleum, and I'm very proud to be a member of Santa Cruz County and very proud of our Board of Supervisors. They have all said no to fracking, they have banned oil exploration, and unanimously just last month, 5-0, Santa Cruz County is supporting carbon fee and dividend legislation in Congress. I hope that today you will join the majority of your constituents, Measure Z, and fellow public officials and deny this appeal in its entirety. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to urge you to listen to your planning commission and deny this appeal. Monterey County has a very long history of using the mitigated negative declarations to approve oil drilling on tens of thousands of acres of land in South County from the 1940s through the 1980s. And we think that Trio's proposed new wells in Haynes Valley are really a new area that's not very pristine. You saw from the photos. There's not been oil drilling there. I think that the voters who voted for Measure Z really did not want to expand the current drilling. They wanted to allow the current drilling in the San Ardo area to continue. But what we're seeing here is a clear violation of that mandate. And what I wanted to also mention is that the initial study and mitigated declaration for Trio's application are really inadequate. It doesn't address, for example, wastewater disposal very adequately. It does not talk about the Salinas River groundwater basin. The Haynes Valley area is in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin, which is upstream from all the cities in the Salinas Valley. And one of the reasons Measure Z passed is because voters were concerned about contamination of the groundwater by things like wastewater disposal and even oil wells themselves. So I think that at a minimum, an EIR should be done. And with regard to takings, I wanted to mention that this is really a denial of something that's incompatible land use. It's not really, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, members of the board. Bob Nunn. It'd be a bigger presentation for you, but I don't think I can give you a detailed understanding of the life cycle analysis of carbon-based fuels in 2 minutes. So we'll amend that a little bit. Sixth generation Californian, got a 9-year-old in the oil business, 35 years. I believe in climate change. The company that I have is doing our best to transition our ways to green energy, as most Californians see. But you can't bury your head in the sand. You can't just say tomorrow, we're going to be green. You stop oil production, or shut it down in Monterey County, Santa Barbara County, and tomorrow it's going to be a better day. You have to find a pathway to get there. And the analysis I was going to give you is an analysis the state of California has done for the California Air Resources Board and Stanford. It's called the OpG study. What that does is it looks at the oil that we would be producing here, if it's productive, who knows? It will displace our imports. We import 62% oil to California. We're not going to change that in this room. But we can make better decisions about the oil we use. This oil will be less carbon intensive. It will pollute less. It won't be transported to the marine environment. It will create local revenues, and you get to decide where that revenue goes. Does it go into green energy projects? Does it buy electric buses? You get to make decisions other than just saying no. No means status quo. It means no changes. It means 60% of our oil gets imported and it continues on and on. We have to transition our way to green energy. We have to make educated decisions based on fact, not on hyperbole, not on subterfuge, on science. We have to make good decisions about what oil we produce, what oil we leave around. This oil is 2.5 times cleaner, if it's there, than the oil we displace. It's an educated point of view, and it gets us in the same direction you're trying to go in this one. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Chair Alejo and members of the board, I'm Pat Abel, the Coastal District Deputy for the State of California's Department of Conservation, Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources. The division oversees the drilling, operation, maintenance, and plug-in and abandonment of oil, natural gas, and geothermal wells here in California. The division has 4 district offices, and I'm here representing the Coastal District, which oversees regulatory compliance in Monterey County. As indicated in staff report, the division does not make land use decisions. It only issues well permits where the local lead agency, such as Monterey County, has decided that land use is allowed. Once operators receive county land use approval and submit the notice to the district office, Our engineering staff carefully reviewed the notices and accompanying drilling program to ensure proposed equipment and procedures are in compliance with the division regulations and field rule conditions are met, reviewing items such as casing setting depths and cementing requirements. Our district field staff are on call 24 hours a day, witnessing permitted work such as block prevention equipment tests, ensuring equipment ratings and installation are correct. The division field testing is just one of the ways to prevent, as far as possible, damage to life, health, the environment, water, property, and natural resources. After a well is drilled, division staff perform environmental inspections, inspecting well conditions and the locations, along with any associated oil and gas testing facilities. Well records and oil production figures are required of operators and made available through our department website at www.conservation.ca.gov. Our office is also sending copies to division permits issued, documentation of witness tests, notices of violation, cancellation notices, and general letters to the Monterey County Deputy Director of Land Use and Community Development, as well as your Chief Planner and Senior Deputy County Counsel. The Department of Conservation is responsible for guiding the use of state's natural resources, acting to ensure a safe and productive environment for California's present and future generations, and the division ensures the safe exploration and development of energy resources. I'm here today to answer any questions you may have with regards to the division's regulations and oversight of exploratory wells such as those proposed today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jan Schreiner. I'm speaking today as a resident of Marina. I also serve on the Marina Coast Water District Board, but these comments are not authorized by that board or any of the board I sit on. I wanted to say, first of all, the staff's 4 options do not include a straight denial of permit and appeal. This improperly excludes the decision made by the Monterey County Planning Commission. The staff should have offered this as an option and a recommended denial. It is imperative that the Board of Supervisors deny this appeal in its entirety. Now, I'm worried that Measure Z button, I find it a bit weird that Measure Z actually won. I mean, because often I'm told you lost, you over. This time I'm being told you lost, you won, and you must get over it. I think it's a peculiar position to be in as a voter in Monterey County. It was a year before the Planning Commission had made their decision. And in this record, the letter of the Center for the Biological Diversity, CDC, it explains on page 7, the Planning Commission rightly decided to protect groundwater rather than enable the oil industry. It goes on to say, Trio claims that fluid migration is unsubstantiated by the record, ignoring the studies submitted into the record by commenters, which unambiguously conclude that chemical, quote, transport through pre-existing or induced subsurface pathways has been documented in conventional oil and gas operations, unquote. That comes from the California Council of Science and Technology, an independent scientific assessment of well stimulation in California. Volume 2, page 104.
Good afternoon. My name is Edward Winslow. I'm the president of the Porter Estate Company, Bradley Ranch, which is the surface landowner where these wells are proposed to be drilled. As you know, southern Monterey County is very rural. We use that land for cattle grazing, row crops, and vineyards. But because of our use, we are probably uniquely concerned about the environmental effect of this proposal. So I've reviewed the initial declaration very carefully. I'm very impressed by the detail and depth of it, and by the comments of all the environmental agencies that were consulted. We are very much in favor of the mitigated negative declaration. Secondly, as you know, the economy in South Monterey County is driven by agricultural and oil and gas development. We believe that granting this permit will create more jobs down there. People need jobs down there. They need better jobs. It will help your constituents, the residents, and will help the economy in South County. Thank you very much.
My name is Judy Karras, and I'll cut to the chase. Item 1, A recent news article. A district judge in Massachusetts last week dismissed charges against individuals who had protested a pipeline going through their Massachusetts region. The judge accepted as admissible evidence part of the defense that addressed the harm being done by the fossil fuel industry and the impact of fossil fuels on the environment and climate change. This will set a new precedent. Item 2. I am reading a book called Precautionary Tale, How One Small Town Banned Pesticides, Preserved Food Heritage, and Inspired a Movement. The author was at Asilomar this January, speaking at the Echo Farm conference. The residents successfully gathered scientific evidence when it turned out that the apple orchards in their area were spraying toxic chemicals that were affecting the dairies there and the organic crops and putting them out of business. It took 2 years, but they did ban the pesticides. This was a movement of direct democracy. Taking a precautionary principle doesn't mean stopping everything or blocking progress. It means looking for alternatives, using democracy and coming up with alternatives that are going to help us in the long run. That's the precautionary principle. Public opinion is strongly in favor of renewable energy and clean technology. Technologies are rapidly dropping in cost and growing in market value. For the county's existing oil wells, I request the county closely monitor and keep factual data available for the public and staff. And for the company that wants to put in oil wells, I suggest that they go into solar and realize that renewable technologies are the wave of the future. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Trio Petroleum. Folks, 2 weeks ago, Washington, D.C. expected 500,000 children, disappointed because their political representatives lacked concern with an issue that directly affects them. Over 800,000 showed, and millions of others throughout the United States and globally also gathered in support of these students. However, the negative effects of lack of reasonable gun control regulation is minute when compared to the daily damage a contaminated environment is having on our health. I fully support the commission. The Planning Commission made the right decision denying Trio's request to expand oil production in Monterey County. The Board of Supervisors should support the Commission's strong leadership in moving away from dirty fossil fuels and towards a healthier, safer future for the county's residents. The future generations will either thank you for caring or blame you for betraying the trust they had in you. Do the right thing, support the needs of people instead of the ones of the oil companies.
Next we'll have Editor. Thank you. My name is Ed Hazard. My family and I are California mineral and royalty owners. And I'm president of the California chapter of the National Association of Royalty Owners. We represent the estimated 600,000 private citizens and oil and gas royalty owners of this state. This is the only nation on earth where the private citizens are allowed to own the oil and gas and mineral assets as they are here. We are very proud of the way our oil and gas is produced here in California and here in Monterey County. It's produced under the strictest regulations in the world. It's refined under the strictest regulations in the world, and it's burned in some of the cleanest cars, internal combustion engines in the world. This is due to regulation. So we don't oppose regulation, but we do oppose shutting down the oil industry here. While I think these people that are opposed to this project are pure of heart and well-intentioned, they're simply wrong. It was mentioned that something like 62% of our oil is imported into this state. I believe it's closer to 70%, maybe over now, because our use of oil, our consumption, is going up while production is going down. We should welcome projects like this. We should be delighted, and I'm delighted, that people like of the caliber of Trio Petroleum are willing to make the investment and to produce the oil under these strict regulations, rather than forcing us to import more oil. Every barrel that isn't produced in this state has to be imported, and most of it's coming from OPEC, South America, where they do not have our strong environmental standards. It's actually adding to the global environmental problem. We are helping it. So thank you, Trio Petroleum. I urge you to grant this appeal it makes sense for the economy and for the environment.
Good afternoon. I'm Craig Moyer, partner of Manat Phelps. We represent ERA, which is reluctantly a plaintiff in the Measure Z case. But this afternoon is not about Measure Z.
If you pull that microphone a little closer so you can. Thank you.
Instead, it's about CEQA and land use. And I urge you to grant the appeal because the whole of the record confirms that there's no unmitigated adverse impacts. The impacts of this action, that is the test wells, have been fully analyzed, and it would simply be wrong to claim that the scope of the initial study should have taken into account the production. Indeed, if it had been, I suspect you would be up here hearing that from folks who are claiming that you predetermined by considering the impacts of those the downstream applications. So you've done the right thing. Staff has done a fabulous job. As usual, they've looked at things appropriately, and on the whole of the record, there's no question but that the impacts have been analyzed, that there are no unmitigated adverse impacts from this project, and therefore there's no basis for an environmental impact report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. We'll be right back. And then we'll open up to anyone else who has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board of Supervisors. Willie Rivera, Director of Regulatory Affairs for the California Independent Petroleum Association, or SIPA. You all should have received a comment letter I submitted late last week. I won't go through everything in it, but I think it's important to highlight a few things. One, in response to some of the comments you're hearing right now, but two, to paint maybe a better picture. I think the action and the vote you're taking today is really twofold. One, it's a vote in affirmation, I think, of the extensive work your staff has already done in actually learning the ins and outs of this project and not relying on hyperbole or anything else to reach conclusions. I think it's also an affirmation of the what really are thousands of individuals who work for countless agencies that regulate the oil and gas industry, one of them being DOGGR, others being the State Water Resources Control Board, your regional water boards, your air districts, your fire departments, your public works departments, your California Air Resources Board, and the list goes on and on. I think it's interesting that we hear a lot about the impacts of climate change and how this particular project plays into that role. But I think it's very important to remember and understand that we don't live in bubbles. And Monterey is not in itself a bubble separate from the rest of the world. So like you've heard today, production done here in California is done in the cleanest way possible. And switching that or trading that for production elsewhere is actually a detriment to the community. It's a detriment to Monterey County. It's a detriment to the environment here, and it just makes no sense. There's time for transition. We support that. We support renewables. We're the largest builder, actually, or we have the largest project coming down in Kern County, and I urge your support of this particular appeal because it just makes sense. Rely on the facts, and I think that's what your staff has done. Thank you.
My name is Doug. I live in Monterey County. There's no such thing as clean oil, guys. It's like clean coal. Come on, wake up. We're talking about green, we call it green. Eat your feet. Use a bicycle. We're using solar. We're using solar. Petroleum gas companies have polluted our air. They have polluted our water. They've polluted our children. And they have polluted our land. And we say no. We urge you no on this measure. Thank you.
Honorable Board of Supervisors. My name is Stanford Escher, and I'm an executive of Trio, a registered geologist. And I've been involved in California oil and gas exploration since 1955. I just want to let you know that we're not just new to Monterey County. We began our studies here in the 1980s. In 2004, we reopened the pre-pregnancy abandoned Lynch Canyon field and operated it carefully, brought it up to production. We won the California Outstanding Lease Maintenance Award from the Department of Conservation and recognition of our clean and careful work in that field. which we're very proud of. And that field right now is making over 500 barrels a day very cleanly, and it's producing taxes in excess of $550,000 a year right now in this county. In December 2011, we made a new field discovery as part of the McCool Ranch area. And we're anticipating federal approval within the next, from the Environmental Protection Agency within about the next 2 months to begin production there. So we have a pretty good history of trying, and this is an area we've been studying for many years. And now we've successfully fulfilled all of the pre-drilling demands of the myriad county and state agencies responsible for the permitting and the ongoing oversight of our activities. And as you know, we're prepared to drill 4 wells, and we need to drill them. And the full environmental impact report has got to be based upon the results of the exploratory efforts. We'd just be guessing otherwise, it would be meaningless. For example, we don't know the thickness of the oil accumulation, we don't know the oil gravity, we don't know the porosity of the oil-bearing zone, the percentage of pore space, the rock that contains the oil. We don't know the daily drilling rates and whether they be sustained.
Thank you, sir.
And so we had nothing to say about the full aerial extent of the accumulation. That's what exploratory drilling is for. You could ask for it. Hold on.
Time is up.
Oh, okay. And thank you. I just want to say I'm really proud to be part of this profession. I think we've done a great job for the last 100 years for this planet, for longevity.
Thank you.
Thank
you, sir. Anyone else?
I'm Terry Eschner. I'm a geologist for Trio Petroleum.
So you just speak closer to the microphone.
Yes, Board of Supervisors for the law firm here today and listening to our appeal. I'm Terry Eschner. I'm a geologist for Trio Petroleum. I just wanted to reiterate a few points, please. Regarding water, there are really 2 types of water that are involved here. One is groundwater. Groundwater is protected in every well by cementing a string of casing at every well. There are about 3,000 wells that have already been drilled and in Monterey County with no incidents, to my knowledge, of problems with groundwater from oil and gas drilling. 3,000 wells and millions around the world. The technology is very sound. Groundwater is it's very routine and safe, standard oil field procedure. The other is surface water. The oil and gas industry as a routine oil field practice protects surface water. The Salinas River runs right through the middle of San Ardo oil field. There are 2,300 wells in the field. The river goes right through it. To the best of my knowledge, there has never been any incidents of surface water contamination from San Ardo oil field. It's a great testament to Chevron and Era and other companies that operate that field. So beautifully. Regarding air, as others have said here today, the use of this oil at Ames Valley, because it's high quality, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing the amount of foreign oil that we will use. There are well-documented state studies that show that this project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if you care about global climate change, you should support this project. One other thing, there's a mantra of some environmental groups, which is keep it in the ground. The problem with California is if you try to keep it in the ground, you just keep it imported because you're just bringing that oil from overseas. So keep it in the ground is just keep it imported for California. Does that mean a lot of time?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wes White, Salinas resident, neighbors east supporter, support community power, supposedly the direction that we're trying to direct ourselves toward in the Tri-County area, cleaner energy, renewable energy. Somebody mentioned that we import 70% of our oil. Reuters last year says why record U.S. oil exports are poised for even more growth. So we sell more oil abroad. The oil that we collect here locally doesn't stay local, it gets sold abroad. So we buy oil outside the area, we sell oil probably higher than what we buy it at. So it's all about the marketing issue. It's what frustrates me, I guess, numbers game. I have an idea that this is going to be a 3-2 vote, and that actually disappoints me greatly that this wasn't even an option to go with the Planning Commission's denial. It bothers me greatly. Who are we really serving? Are we serving people? Are we serving business? Are we serving tax revenue? Because we need to be worried about our future kids or grandkids, their grandkids. The oil production is not going to do that for us. And supposedly we made a commitment that we're not going to do that. But apparently this is how I feel. It seems like we're just going to go full bore at it anyway. So what does that make us? Liars? We're not going in the right direction. If keep on doing oil is just an addiction. You know, we're saying we're going to do renewable, but then these 4 wells are going to turn into 20 real quick. Which direction do we really want to go?
Thank you, Chair Alejo. I'll be very brief. I heard 2 main points during the public testimony. First was a concern about piecemealing. Why isn't a full-blown EIR being done right now? And I addressed that in the beginning, but I wanted to just tell you about a case called National Parks. That was a landfill case. And as part of the landfill, they had to do supplemental facilities to receive the trash and process it. Those are known as MRFs, material recovery facilities. The MRFs were not included in the EIR, and of course people shouted about it, went to court, went up to the appellate district, and the appellate district said it would be infeasible at the present to provide more detailed, useful information because we don't even know where these MRFs will be situated or who will be operating them. And said, and in any event, before these MRFs get sited, you're going to do a full-blown EIR anyway. And so it said that the EIR was not required at that point. There's a very practical reason why a full-blown EIR is not required at this point. Because everybody thinks the applicant just wants to do a negative declaration because it's the most efficient. No, the environmental community, frankly, does not want a full-blown EIR now either, because the full-blown EIR was done right now and approved. And then a whole lot more information was done over the next several years. There's no chance to come back and say, hey, relook at this. You've already given the environmental approval. That's why it's not done in that way. The way it's done is you do the environmental review for the exploratory, you get your information, then you do the full-blown EIR. Second, there was the questions about the findings and the studies. This is a 100-page initial study in mitigated negative declaration dealing with hazardous materials, greenhouse gases, geology, hydrology, land use, mineral, noise, population, air quality, biology, and 10 other related factors that have to be looked at. Nobody has ever said on page X of this section that was wrong. Nobody's ever challenged an actual finding from this study. It's all this general, drilling can be bad. But the only findings we have are detailed findings which support the application. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay, we will now bring it back for discussion, and we'll start with Supervisor Salinas.
Just quickly before I make my comments, anything that staff wants to add that they heard that we might need to hear from your perspective?
A couple of the speakers mentioned that the option did not include an option to deny the application. That would actually be option 4. If it is the board's desire, you would pass a motion of intent, and then staff would prepare a resolution to deny the project and deny the appeal and come back at a future date.
I just have a question for staff. I know this applicant has gone through all the general plan ordinances, general plan that we have, the zoning ordinances, the land use for South Valley. There's nothing that they have done that goes counter to what our rules are right now. Is that correct? I mean, they've gone through general plan requirements.
Yeah, I mean, Supervisor Salinas, I can jump in, and then perhaps Mr. Schubert wants to add. Currently, as stated in the staff report and as explained, Measure Z doesn't control this application because it was stayed while it was pending. Now we have the judgment of the Superior Court. So at this point, Measure Z does not control this application at this point. However, predating Measure Z, the county has long had in its zoning ordinance, Title 21, a requirement for a use permit. In these particular zoning districts, and I'm getting into the planning, Mr. Schubert can speak to this, the exploration of oil and gas is allowed with a use permit. A use permit is a discretionary entitlement, and so the Board of Supervisors is required to find, if it wants to grant the use permit, that it is not detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Mr. Schubert.
Yeah, it's Title 21 that governs this project, and under the F40 zoning, which is what we're looking at here, it's a use permit requirement for oil and gas exploration. The actual development standards in the F40 district do not go into like setbacks and heights and so on requirements for these. They're on a case-by-case basis. Our analysis looked at the 2010 general plan and the South County area plan, and we found this proposal to be consistent with all those policies.
And that was my point. I think that they followed whatever existing rule that they had to go through. They've gone through those and met those requirements. Mr. Chair, so I'm going to make a motion that we grant the appeal, which is option number one, and there's a second. I'll explain my rationale for that. If not, then maybe I can just make my comments and hope and follow up. You know, having been
The motion, is there a second?
For a second?
Second. You can second it.
You can second it. So this is at the no hearing, so obviously when some people make the comment that we have to follow the planning commission regulations, that's not necessarily true. I mean, we listen to the testimony, we listen to the issues, and then we make a decision. You know, I've been here long enough that for folks to sometimes insinuate or make almost personal attacks to us as individuals that we somehow don't care for the environment. You know, I take offense to that. I was in the assembly when I voted for AB 32, and I was a holdup for a while, not because I didn't think that we ought to make more fuel-efficient vehicles. I supported that. I thought that was good for the environment, for the global, from the global climate warming. But I had to hold out because I had to represent my district. My district included agriculture, and that bill, when it came up, wanted to almost outlaw the use of the trucks that we need to get produce from the field to the processing center. They wanted to outlaw heavy equipment. How the hell could we do agriculture? My view has always been a very incrementalist type of view to dealing with climate warming. I believe that we got to do everything we can. But when we get too overbroad, too overreaching, I think you're affecting people. And for anybody to think that I can't stand up for my constituents, I represent the oil workers out in those fields. Young people and young women that came out of the high school in South County that have good paying jobs now. Everybody talks about bringing good paying jobs to this county. But then when we have the opportunity here to protect 8 or 1,000 jobs, everybody wants us to bail out on those constituents. Well, I won't. And the reality is my constituents, the LUEC, the Land Use Advisory Committee, voted 501 to support this Trio exploratory well. And they did it for a reason. They understand that's their community, that's their valley, that's where they live. So for anybody to come here and then to think that somehow I'm not connected or I'm not representing my constituents, well, I think I am. And so I wanted to send a clear, strong message. What we do here is following the rules and the laws. We're not breaking any rules, we're not breaking any laws. So we ought to be able to continue to do that. And at some point, hopefully, we will get more alternative energy. And for the Center for Biological Diversity to come here and sometimes try to lecture us on the environment, you're the ones that opposed the solar project in San Benito County. You questioned the solar project that we were putting in my district, also in South County, the solar flat project. You had concerns, and we said, why are you concerned about this? Let's support this, and we all want more renewable energy. But that's their position. So, you know, I get a little disappointed with that, Mr. Chair. I think we ought to let this go through. If they find commercial oil, then we'll do the full-blown EIR. That's fine. At that point, we can look at whatever mitigating options or issues that we might have to deal with. But for right now, I think it's the right thing to do. It's a fair thing to do, is to allow Trio to continue with their exploratory well.
Anyone else?
I really appreciate what Supervisor Salinas said. I'm looking at it more legally. And these applicants did everything they were supposed to according to the rules. And, you know, frankly, looking at what the conclusions that the Planning Commission came up with are not supported by any factual evidence that we have and the findings that were there. And they're not using steam enhancements. They're not fracking in this process. This is a test well only. And they were talking about the Measure Z, which isn't controlling, but some people here talked about a stay. I mean, by the time they run their test wells and get ready, if it ever comes to that, to try to implement production wells, we will have a final decision, or should have a final decision on Measure Z. So clearly, I think they're entitled to legally entitled to the relief that they're seeking.
Thank you. Other supervisors? Supervisor Parker and Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate all the testimony that we've heard today, and thanks to everyone for coming. I have some concerns that, you know, we are expanding into a new area, at least a new section of the Haynes Valley, and I felt that the greenhouse gas analysis, greenhouse gas emission analysis was not very thorough, and for Mr. Balch's sake, pages 62 to 64. My concern is that there wasn't any distinction made between methane and CO2, and we know that methane is, depending on who's talking, 70 to 90 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So, and I appreciate that the local air resources district was consulted, but they don't actually regulate methane, and there are some new rules that have come out from the California Air Resources District or Air Resources Board about vapor collection versus flare. Flare is kind of an old technology and maybe not so great in terms of really mitigating those impacts, and I didn't feel that that was discussed at all. And I think as a county, we have the Community Climate Action Plan that we're trying to develop and then implement. So for me, there may be some conditions of these wells that might need to be put in place to reflect some of this more refined greenhouse gas emission, which I felt was lacking in the initial study. So I'd like to make a substitute motion that we direct staff to look further into the potential environmental impacts, specifically these greenhouse gas ones, and I don't know if there are others that my colleagues might have concerns about.
I'll make a second to that motion.
There's a substitute motion and a second, and now we will continue to deliberate or speak on the substitute motion before taking that motion up first.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Supervisor. And thank you again, all of you, for coming here today to testify. I feel that we learn a lot when we get to listen to both sides of issues. There's no question about the fact that there's a lot of passion on each side of this issue. It also gives us, as a board, the opportunity to speak among ourselves publicly about the feelings and the thoughts that we have and our interpretation of the matters at hand. And the way that I'm seeing this is that I don't feel comfortable that there has been enough review. And I feel that way because I think that we're just looking at the short term when we really need to have a long view here. I believe that we know if we're looking at test wells, we're really going to be looking at very fully producing wells. And I don't think that I haven't at least seen enough information to make me feel comfortable that we are going to be able to, that our community and our land is going to be able to sustain the numbers of wells that I think we already see in the San Ardo Valley, the San Ardo area. If we go ahead just to say yes to the test wells, I believe that we're really just putting our foot right into the actual drilling of the wells. One of the things that I worry about is that the report doesn't include anything about the potential damage that the wells themselves, not the test wells, can do to the deep aquifer. That troubles me a lot, and I don't think that we've seen enough information about that. I worry that as I said, if the test wells prove viable, that's going to mean the permit application, not only for the 4 production wells, but for an entire new section of our county, which will then be open to oil extraction and exploration. As I look at this, I understand the importance that people have. I understand jobs. I know that that's very important. I know also that there are a lot of people that work in the fields who don't live in Monterey County, and that's fine. You know, this is great. It's important for us to go across the county line. When someone told me that there are already 3,000 wells active in Monterey County, I must say I thought, that's one well for every 150 people who live here. That's a lot of wells in one county. It's a lot of oil that's being produced here. And I don't think that there's any reason for us to expect that the wells are not going to continue to prosper in the San Bernardino fields as they are now. The discussion around the Monterey Bay Community Power, I think, is important. I do believe that many of us are looking for alternative sources of energy. And I agree with one of the speakers who said you can't just shut off everything today and expect to be fully non-fossil fuel supported. But that isn't what we're doing. We still have one well for every 150 people in Monterey County by just continuing in the way that we are now. I feel that while I appreciate the comments that have been made, and while I want to see our county prosper in all aspects, we will never prosper if we don't have the agricultural work that we have, and if we don't have the reliance on tourism that we have. And we won't have any of that if we don't have water, and I worry about that element here. So those are the comments that I have to make on this. I am hopeful to hear from my colleagues. I simply don't feel that we have enough information at this point, and I would like to support number 3 of board options, which is to direct the staff to conduct further investigation of the potential environmental impact that this decision will make.
Thank you, Supervisor. I had a few questions. First of all, this is for test wells. If the appellant does the testing, and let's say there isn't natural resources, then they're likely not going to come back and ask for the special use permit. But if they do, then that still has to, can you explain what the process is for the public to understand? If they do the test wells, and if you want to get the special use permit, what has to happen at that point? Do you have to come back for a full hearing to the planning commission again, and then perhaps to the full board? Do they need to do a full EIR at that point? If you could explain what the process is.
Yes, if they decide to convert the wells to full production, there would be a brand new application. It would be a brand new use permit application. It would be subject to environmental review. And at that point, we would have to decide whether it would be a mitigated negative declaration or an EIR at that point. But it would be like a whole new application.
Yes.
To add one point, in addition, they would also be subject to the rules in effect at that time.
Yes. And that's why I just want to point that out, that there is further process and perhaps environmental review still ahead, depending on what happens if they are allowed to have a test well. The other one is, people mentioned that this is an entirely new area. You had a chart that you used at the very beginning to kind of lay out where are there existing wells at. Can you go back to that? Is this an entirely new area, or are there other existing wells near the...
This is on page 6 of the slide deck.
The existing wells are shown in yellow dots on this map.
Can you point out how many wells are in the vicinity of this area? So give here and view the entirely new area. I just want to see.
There's a cluster of existing wells to the southwest of the site. Looks like about a dozen of them. And then there's like 3 more to the south and 1 to the southeast.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned there's what, 21 conditions placed on this. If these test wells will be granted. Some of the key ones, one were that, as one of the slides pointed out, there is no fracking and no acid stimulation permitted. Could you mention what are other key conditions, restrictions placed on this potential permit?
Hello, Megan Jones, I'm the manager for the initial study. In terms of the environmental impacts or mitigation measures that become conditions, there was a handbook of 14 total related to air quality as well as biological resources. Do you have specific questions on some of them, or?
I'm just trying to lay out because I just want to be clear that if this is granted, under the original motion that there is numerous, several dozen restrictions placed on this potential test well permit. Under the conditions of approval.
Yeah, there are conditions regarding the, how long these test wells can be out there. Each well cannot be used for more than a year and a half. And it would be a total of up to like 6 years maximum that the wells can be used for. There's conditions regarding restoration if they do not find, they want to convert them to production wells, then there's requirements that they convert these sites back to their original condition.
Thank you for that. And lastly, I mean, this is a heavily regulated area. So this would, even if the permits were to be granted, this would be still subject to review for compliance with all laws by DOGGR, the Central Coast Water Quality Control Board, the Air Resources Board. I just want to make sure that we all understand, no matter what happens, that all these laws and regulations and all these agencies who actively oversee this would still have that type of oversight and monitoring role.
Yes, there would be additional permits required by several state and federal agencies for the wells.
And like, just not to just add my comments, I mean, it's a tough decision. I really hear from all sides, and I think I learned when I was in the legislature, just like my colleagues in Parcel, Salinas, you hear all sides and trying to hear all opinions, hopefully make a more informed decision. This is not an easy one for me because I do understand the recent measure that was approved by the voters and some of the arguments that were made, but one of those key being the support for a ban on fracking, and that's included here. It's included strictly. There is no fracking. There will be no acid well stimulation, and that's an important condition that is included here. And like Supervisor Salinas, I had also opportunity to support legislation that really advanced the goals of renewable energy, SB 350, that will increase our energy portfolio to renewable by 50% from 2030, more than any other state in the nation. I also agree that there are some groups that oppose this today, but when I also advocated for the Kenosha Valley Solar in San Benito, there were groups that opposed that too. And that those were good jobs. It would have provided almost $1 million in revenue for a very poor county like San Benito, our neighboring county to the east. It was in a very minimal use area for agriculture or grazing. It had 23,000 acres of mitigated lands, corridors for kit fox and kangaroo rat. They downsized the project, and even then there was 2 sequel lawsuits to oppose that good renewable energy job. In fact, it was so important to us. Senator Cannell and I met in one of the Senate rooms to try to see what else could be done. And again, those groups were opposing renewable energy jobs. And I just want to point that out because we talk about accountability and really not just coming here and giving us slogans about we support renewable jobs. This was a project that would have been one of the largest solar projects in Northern California to benefit local families, local jobs that a project labor agreement included in. And even then, it was subject to sequel lawsuits. And finally, San Benito is now suing because the project was minimized to almost nothing. They're not going to get nothing in tax revenue. And then those jobs are now outsourced to Imperial Valley in the desert area. And people of San Benito County lost on those opportunities. So I take that to heart when I hear these kind of arguments. I said, I also want people to be sincere and not be disingenuous when it comes to, are you committed to renewable jobs? Then they should be not opposing and suing good renewable projects in our neighboring county. And everybody in our community should know that that's the flip side. That when they hear that they don't want these types of projects, they should also hear when the same groups are suing good renewable projects in our local communities as well. That's only fair. And that's putting both choices out there for people to hear and the public to hear and contemplate when they're making a decision about who's supporting and who's opposing the good jobs that we all often hear and talk about in the community. So with
That's really good. Could I have additional comments?
yes,
Thank you.
after I'm done. So that's why this project, I have to separate some of my own emotions and look at what is the record. Are we complying with our general plan? Are we complying by current existing rules? And that's a different analysis, you know, and if we're trying to be fair and making sure that there's certain rules that are laid out, even though they're challenged and even though there's existing measures, have the rules been followed? And as the record lays out, pretty convincingly, it has. And so this case for this particular project, even though I hear the concerns coming from our community residents, I think on this project I would have to favor the original motion for today. And then I'll give time to Supervisor Adams.
Thanks, thank you very much. I have a few more questions that I wanted to ask and a couple of additional comments. So the land is zoned F as in Frank 40, is that correct?
Yeah, there's actually two zoning districts. Some of the wells are on F40 and some are on PG, permanent grazing.
And so is there a zoning change that needs to happen in order for this to move forward, since it's neither farming nor permanent grazing?
No. Oil and gas exploration is allowed in both of those districts with a use permit.
So it's the use permit that is the key issue here. The use permit that they will only apply for after they do the test wells.
So that's what before you today is the use permit for the exploratory wells only, not for the permanent wells.
So this would be, today we would be granting the use permit for the test wells.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, let me also jump in there, because yes, right now they're getting a use permit for exploratory wells, but under the current zoning, they would also need another use permit for production wells. So then they would have to come back through the process. In terms of the zoning, so the zoning code has lists of uses. It has allowed uses and then conditional uses, uses allowed with a use permit. So in the future, for example, if the Board of Supervisors wanted to amend the ordinance, you wouldn't necessarily have to change the zoning, PG or farmlands. You could also change what uses are allowed in that zoning or what uses are allowed with a use permit within that zoning, as long as you have a rational basis for your amendment. So that would be like looking at a kind of going forward action.
So what happens then if this board decides to grant the use permit for the test wells, like their term, today, and they go through the process and, oh, what a surprise, there's oil here. And then they come back to, in say, 8 months from now or a year from now, and they come back to ask for the use permit. Could the board at that time determine that they do not want to issue the use permit?
So actually, well, a couple different questions. One, if the board, if in between those two events, the board changes the zoning, then a new use permit is subject to the new zoning. It would not be subject to the old zoning. So for example, if there were no longer use allowed for oil and gas for the use permit, then when they would come back, it would now be inconsistent with the zoning. So that would be one. Secondly, if you did not change the zoning, but they come in for a use permit, it would be evaluated on the particular facts and circumstances. There would be further environmental review. And so that you would also, even under the current zoning, you would then be still faced with the questions whether it's detrimental, what are the environmental impacts, if there are significant unavoidable impacts, are there overriding considerations, you have to make findings under CEQA. So even under existing zoning, you would have a new discretionary decision to make in the future.
At that time, in the future. Okay, thank you for that. And then just another question. So if in fact they do the test well, and then they see that there is oil, and then they have to apply for the use permit, do they stop operation until the second use permit is granted?
It would depend. They could determine that there's oil that they want to produce and apply for the use permit. Under this use permit, they'd still be subject to the time constraints, no more than a year and a half on each well. So they could be doing both at the same time. They could still be testing and they could come in and apply.
So they would not have to stop, even if they didn't have a second use permit.
It would really depend on when they apply for the use permit, because if you look at on page 17, condition 34, this is in Exhibit B, it explains that the use permit expires 18 months from the date that construction is started on the fourth and final well. Each of the 3 other wells may not be tested more than 18 months from the date that construction is started on the well. So if they did the construction completely seriatim, it would be 18 times 4, and then that would be the end. That's how much time they have under condition 34. But if in the middle of all that they decide to come in and apply for a use permit, there's nothing that prevents that.
Nothing that would prevent that, okay. Okay, thank you for those questions. And then finally, just a message to my colleagues. You know, this is about what we're looking at today and for the future. It isn't about the past. And I'm sorry that there were disappointments about the solar farm, but that was then and this is now. And with that, I'll end my comments.
Well, you can't talk about the future. If a solar project was going to be for many years in the making to provide taxes, reduce carbon emissions, local jobs, that is not something in the past. That would have been for decades ahead of us. So we're talking when these projects provide benefits, community benefits, tax base for many years. So it's not something in the past, because those, as recently as there was resistance when then First Solar came after that in South Monterey County, similar, but luckily the governor's office intervened and brought all the stakeholders together, and by some miracle avoided a lot of the bad lessons from solar. But almost any time you have solar projects come forward, especially in Northern California in the non-desert areas, there's a similar experience. And so as policymakers, and by my own experience, I probably spent more time on that solar project than any other one. And after 6 years of meeting after meeting, meeting with Fish and Wildlife, Chuck Bonham, dealing with the Fresno Fish and Wildlife Permitting Office, I did everything possible. And even after 6 years, and they spent over $50 million to get it through that Arsenal phase, still didn't get the permits for Fish and Wildlife or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then after 2 failed lawsuits, sequel lawsuits, then the strategy was to make sure the Fresno office Fish and Wildlife staff didn't issue the permits. And that's why at the end, a new owner came in, because sometimes these projects take so long, they switch owners many different times. And I think the last owner who had the project basically caved in and said, we're moving it out of San Benito County and giving very little benefit to one of the poorest counties. And trust me, San Benito County, it illustrates the reality of some of these efforts. A poor county that could only afford to hire 2 sheriff deputies on a shift for an entire, very rural and expansive county. I had to fight to get them enough money for bailiffs for their new courthouse. I had to fight 3 years to just have a $4 million debt to the state erased from their books. So yeah, I did a lot to advocate for that poor county. And when I see that there's a good project, a renewable energy project is defeated, yeah, I take offense, because the people who suffer are the poor residents of that county. Mostly people of color, 60% are Latino in San Benito County. So yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not just about something in the past, because these lessons are ongoing. They repeat themselves in many different communities, not just here locally.
And you know, perhaps that's what we're doing here today. You know, do we want to continue to repeat ourselves? All I'm asking for is more environmental review of this project. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not saying no, I'm not saying it's a bad project. I'm just saying I think we need more information. That's all.
Anyone else? Sina, we have a substitute motion first. We'll start with that, and we'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
No. All those opposed? Motion fails 3-2. Now we will revert back to the original motion by Supervisor Salinas, seconded by
Chair?
Supervisor Phillips. Yes.
Could I ask if the maker and seconder of the motion might consider, there are two things I'm interested in, and whether there's a way to have this be explicit. One of these things may happen anyway, but the other may not. So one is related to the methane. To ask that it be monitored, but also that we look to have the most recent vapor capture technology be applied to these wells. It may come with the state regulation or it may not, so I just like it to be explicit if the maker and seconder are willing to go there. The other is the toxic wastewater disposal. So there's going to be stuff that comes up, and the toxic stuff needs to be dumped somewhere. There have been, speaking of the past, there have been situations where that toxic water mostly was dumped or was put in a drinking water supply and not disposed of properly. I know it's all supposed to happen according to, the rules. And I think one thing that might be helpful in this case is if there's a way to have the waste disposal sites be made public, so that people who are interested in this kind of thing can easily know that the hazardous waste is being disposed of properly. So those are the two additions. They essentially be conditions to the permit.
Our recon consultant may have some input on those matters.
Just a point of clarification on the methane and the greenhouse gas analysis. We did quantify methane that was included. What's typically done in greenhouse gas analyses, we look at what's called carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. And so it basically puts all of the different greenhouse gases into one metric that's easier to sort of quantify and compare to a threshold. So it does acknowledge that things like methane has a lot more global warming potential, as they call it. So just did want to clarify that that is included in the analysis.
So that's on page 63, or where that little table is?
Yeah, the
Okay.
table.
How would a normal person know that?
That's
Would
a
they?
good question.
Okay, all right. So I just, okay.
Yeah, it is technical. We do our best to, explain it fairly simply. As far as, adding mitigation to monitor the methane, the analysis didn't find an impact, we didn't exceed thresholds for greenhouse gases, but there are mitigation measures for air quality, and that includes various requirements from NCAR as far as adding something specific to methane capture. That's probably something that we looked into. I can't speak to that very specifically at this point. Yeah, on the toxic wastewater disposal, it sounded to me like your main concern or consideration was, do you want the locations of those to be disclosed? If it's a little bit outside of the
Do the applicant, Mr. Chair, can respond?
Yes, sir. You want to come around?
Thank you. Our policy on wastewater, and particularly in this project, which we've already done in Kern County, will truck the wastewater to a licensed disposal facility, and we track that with manifests, and that data is available. And I believe in the last project we did, we supplied those manifests to David Mack, who was the planner at that time, so he could track where that water went, how much of it, what side it went to, all that. And
So
I think that if that condition isn't part of it, that's not a problem for us. We intend on doing that anyway.
Great, so it would be possible to make that, that'd be great. Yeah, so back to the methane then. So it sounds like the wastewater, or the hazardous waste disposal probably isn't a problem. I guess, because we don't exactly know, so the local air district does not regulate methane. So if there's going to be anything, whether it's the monitoring or the vapor capture, it would be through the state Air Resources Board. So all I'm asking is that we put it as a as a condition or a request, it may be that they think flaring is fine. But they do have a fairly recent rule about methane. So what I'm aiming for is to have it be just flagged so that we can have the best possible measures being taken because, you know, a fair amount of that will be being produced over the course of 18 months and 18 months and 8. I mean, even if all wells only operate for 18 months total, that's 4 of them. And methane is a pretty large constituent of the stuff that will be coming up. So anyway, if to flag it and have the best possible measures used, that's where I'm headed. And it may be that the State Air Resources Board will say, here's our best thing, this is what we're going to do, and it isn't vapor capture, I don't know, but just so that they're aware as they're looking at it, that, you know, we'd like the best protection we can.
So for clarification, you're proposing what amendment to the original motion?
So the amendment would be to flag that in terms of the methane release, that we get the best possible technology, vapor capture if possible. You know, it's probably going to be the state that's doing it, but anyway, the best possible process, and that for the hazardous waste disposal, that the sites where it's being disposed are made public. And it sounds like that's, from the applicant's perspective, it's not a problem. So those are my two requests to be added to the conditions.
Second on the motion to accept those or not?
Trying to figure out from the applicant, I think the wastewater issue, they said they track it, they have a manifest again to the applicant. Do you understand that additional, because I don't know how realistic that is to impose it here as a
If Pat Abel was here, she can talk as far as the DOG is concerned regarding that.
She's here. Are you from DOT? She's here.
Did you want to talk about that, Pat, about methane capture or?
Well, that's actually not under our jurisdiction. It would be the airport area.
They have pretty strong restrictions on that, and whatever the best available technology in dealing with that, we'd be glad to do that, we would do that anyway. And if it's flaring, it's flaring. If it's vapor recovery, it's vapor recovery. But all our tanks out there are all sealed anyway, so that's taken care of. But we'll abide by whatever the agency who governs that requires us to do. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if you would like, we could take a 5-minute recess and work out some language to add to the conditions if you want something very specific.
It's really for making the motion to consider whether he wants to add that friendly amendment to his original motion or not.
I think as long as it's a backed, best available technology, you can fit it and find, and the applicant's willing to abide by that, if it's realistic, okay. Then I'm comfortable, and hopefully that'll get the support of a larger majority.
And the secretary, okay with that? Is that additional? We're clear on what the language is? Staff?
I think that I can address that. I think what it sounds like to me is we'd be coming up with a new condition of approval that would essentially require maybe tracking the methane emissions using the best available control technology, whatever the best available is to capture that methane, and possibly consulting with the state California Air Resources Board about what appropriate levels are.
Okay, there's a motion with that friendly amendment and a second. Anything else you want to respond to that, are we good?
If I understand it correctly, what you're asking to do is abide by the law, whatever it says, and we'll do it. Is that what you're saying? I mean, because I think they already require that.
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Just wanting to flag that we want the top.
We will.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Chair, if I can say, I'm not entirely enthused about this. I was hoping that we could actually do a little more work on some of these issues, but with these assurances I'm willing to support the exploratory wells.
Okay, all right. If no one else, then I will call for the vote on this original motion by Supervisor Salinas. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
So motion carries.
Microphone's off. No.
Motion carries 4-1.